Yes, so hello everyone. I am Lucia Nader. I'm from Brazil, and I am part of the research team of PACTO, this Brazilian organization that is responsible for the learning and evaluation journey of the Weaving Resilience Initiative from Ford Foundation. So I'm here today with these two amazing women, Budshi, Kismadi, and Mónica Roemah, to interview them for what we are calling ResiliPedia. This is a product, part of the learning part of this learning and evaluation journey. And it's an effort to learn more from each other, to discuss some key concepts of the Weaving Resilience Initiative. This was a recurrent demand when we interviewed some of the grantees of the Weaving Resilience Initiative, saying we want to hear what the other grantees have to say about these concepts that we have all been talking about, but not really exchanging in depth. And we would like to do that in a humanized way. This means not another report, but to hear voices, to see faces, and to hear each other in a humanized way. So ResiliPedia is an effort to do that. We are trying. Let's see how it works. It's not about coming to one single definition. We are also not asking this from Mónica and Budshi. Can you define what is resilience? No, resilience, that is the first concept we are discussing today. Resilience is a multifaceted concept. Depending on who you speak to, the definition will vary, the views and the perspectives will vary. And this is what makes it very rich as well. So thank you again, Budshi and Mónica. Budshi, let me introduce yourself a little bit, but you are the executive director of Roemah Inspirit. Please, after you can correct my pronunciation.
It's Roemah.
Yeah, thank you.
Roemah. Yeah.
Roemah, yeah. And
Roemah Inspirit.
okay. And this is an organization that has the objective of contributing to building a vibrant civil society ecosystem in Indonesia, where you are based and you're from, supporting civil society organizations and leaders to connect, collaborate, and support each other in amplifying change. So welcome. Mónica is the founder and executive director of Puentes. Puentes is an organization that aims to strengthen the narrative power of social movements in Latin America. Bienvenida, Mónica. So both your organizations have received a grant from the Ford Foundation Weaving Resilience Initiative to support the strengthening of civil society organizations and movements across the Global South. And we would like to hear today your views about resilience. What is resilience? What is not resilience? And what are you learning about it since you start to implement the Weaving Resilience Initiative, but also before that, as I know your organizations have been doing a great work for quite a long time now. So please, Budshi, can you tell me a little bit, who are you? What is a little bit about your journey and the reasons that led you to work with strengthening the civil society ecosystem?
Thank you, Lucia, and hello, Mónica. It's so nice to be here with all of you. I how where do I start? So I started working with civil society organizations when my first job was to be a program officer of a very small Japanese funding organization based in Tokyo that was working on a variety of issues. It was a small community trust, and it's actually through that I got to work more from the, I suppose, donor perspective. But it gave me an opportunity to get into the NGO world. I come from a family where social activism has always been part of our DNA. So I grew up with that sense of, as my father used to say, is what is your task in life? So, so I had that as part of my upbringing, and it was always something that I suppose I looked for in my work. So I started off working in civil society organizations, but never really on the grassroots level. So it was always either intermediary or supportive role. I was fortunate to start at a period where the Indonesian NGO movement was already in its no longer in the very initial stage. It was in the 90s. And although organizations were working on specific issues, there was a lot of information sharing. So I felt that it was a community of NGOs. Fast forward, in the mid 90s, starts to 2000s, it seemed like people were busy doing their own things, and not talking to each other as much anymore. And I felt that this was unfortunate, but it was just the way that environment people talk to environment people, education, health, everything was sort of separate from each other. Um, and then I got into facilitation. And as a facilitator, I got to work with a variety of organizations from all levels. And often I would wonder why people weren't talking to each other. This is a really good organization here. How come they're actually in the next village almost? And but they always wanted to do things on their own. And then when it became too big, they would be overwhelmed and then would end up not doing anything instead of asking another NGO to work with them. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, there were also donors during that time started forcing organizations to work with each other to collaborate, in order for funding purposes. And that didn't work either. So when the opportunity came for our organization to be part of this Weaving Resilience initiative, the idea was, how can we play a role to get organizations to communicate with each other and support each other? So the entrance point has still built on facilitation, communication, bringing about stories and empowering people to be able to tell their own story, as opposed to having civil society organizations tell those stories for them. So that has, in order to find the interconnectedness, it's not even to find it, but to recognize it in the work that we do. So that was really what brought me to where I am today. And I think we'll talk about this later, but 3 years down the line, I think we're getting closer to what I think I was hoping to see us do after getting to know Mónica and the work that Mónica is doing in terms of narrative shifts and narrative change.
That's very
But it's taken a while.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Butsi. Thank you. I like the interconnectedness and let people tell their own stories, right? And what is communication here and consultation? Well, talking about communication and narratives, Mónica, who are you? And I saw that you have a degree in law. What led you to work with narratives from your journey, please?
I say that I am a lawyer in rehab. I think my experience was leading a lot of strategic litigation efforts and training a whole generation of attorneys, mostly working in gender justice and human rights issues. But at some point, I felt that I ran into the limits of the law as a tool for social change. And I decided to leave the organization that I had been working with for a long time, Women's Link Worldwide. And I wanted to step back and broaden my scope, and both in terms of tactics, but also in terms of themes. And that coincided with 2016, which is the first year that Trump got elected, the year that Brexit took place. And in Colombia, we lost the peace referendum. And all of that was a sign to me that we needed to revisit the way that we were doing our work. I felt that as a red flag that all of these things occurred and they surprised us, the people that are supposed to be creating social change and intervening and working with those societies when these things happen, and took us by surprise. So I started, I was a consultant then, and I worked with a couple of donors trying to understand what had happened and what were the recommendations. So I started talking about the need to do audience research and understand how the development of social networks required us to do social listening, so we could also understand what were the conversations happening there. that we needed to break through the bubbles, both like social bubbles, but also digital bubbles, and understand how can we connect with different audiences through values so we can present our agendas under a light that presents like a common connective tissue. And this was also important in terms of thinking about different social movements as interconnected. I thought it was very strange how for authoritarians it was so easy to see all of us as part of the same team, but among ourselves, in the best case, we probably thought of the other movements as sibling movements, but we never sat together with them to strategize. And this was certainly something that we needed to correct if we wanted to be resilient in the face of these times of rising authoritarianism. And I have to say that this year feels very similar to 2016.
Wow, Mónica, it's quite valuable, I would say, right? That we are in a cycle now, 2016 and now 2024. And what do we expect? When will the cycle end or change, right? So yeah, thank you so much.
And what do we need to learn?
And what we need to learn from it, exactly. Yeah, thank you. Taking into, you mentioned we needed to be more resilient, so we need to start seeing what we could do. So Mónica, let's take you first. I know that in the last 3 years, you have been working to implementing activities of the Weaving Resilience Initiative to strengthen the resilience of organizations, movements, and the ecosystem. That is another key topic that I'm sure we will talk about today, but it's a second concept of the ResiliPedia that we will also explore. Taking into account these last 3 years, but also since 2016, right? Or since before that you have been working with this, where do you see resilience today? Do you see it in like, what makes you believe that resilience is possible? And in your day-to-day life, in the organization you lead or the organizations you support, where do you see resilience, or where does resilience show up?
Well, the answer I'm going to give you is a collection of ideas that came up in a previous meeting that we had with the colleagues from Weaving Resilience. And I summed it up as the capacity to dream, energy to think, power to act, and a space to connect. And I think we need all of those if we want to continue, first of all, believing that social change is possible, that another world is possible and worth working for together collectively. And I think precisely in 2016, as well as this year, the fact that we feel that there's so much darkness around us, that the possibilities are shutting down, the fact that there are people willing and committed to believing that another world is possible and finding the way, finding the cracks in the middle of darkness through which light comes in and allows us to see possibilities so we can keep walking. That's where I think resilience lies. I think the fact that together across social movements, across geographies, across disciplines, we can probably agree on what's the North Star, what's the desired world that we would like to see, what does the world look like, what would the world look like if all our causes win? Yeah. And then with that in mind, find the steps that we can take. So from the difficult realities of today, we can continue walking. So the willingness to continue walking, but also the capacity to find the tools to allow us to continue walking despite difficult landscapes, which is part resisting the difficulties, but also, and importantly, part understanding what the opportunities lie and taking them. And all of this has two components that to me are critical to understanding resilience. One is care, How do we care for each other? How do we care for ourselves? How do we allow others to care for us? Like the triangle of care. And the other one is collectivity. There is absolutely no way to talk about resilience as an individual. We need to do this collectively, and that's where the link to the idea of an ecosystem becomes important.
Well, gracias. You made me think. I'm reading this philosopher from Nigeria called Bayo Akomolafe, and he talks a lot about the cracks, right? And how we can. I thought it was very interesting. Something he said: we will not get there from here. So, how do we keep dreaming and we can see the world we want and somehow build our capacity, but dreaming and thinking differently. So thank you so much.
He also says times are urgent. Let's
slow down.
Let's slow down.
Yeah, exactly. It's very interesting. And Budshi, what about you? Do you see this capacity to dream, energy to be here? And how do you see resilience? Where does resilience show up in your daily work with organizations? And is there any definitions or keywords that you think about when you hear the word resilience?
I'm going to reflect on this and connect it to an event we just had on October 17th, so a month ago, which we called Colaboraya, which is collabo is of course collaboration, and raya means huge or big, but it also means to celebrate. And this was perhaps, it was something we felt needed to be done, but we weren't actually sure. It was also an experiment. So bringing together a range of individuals working on social justice, organizations working on social justice, and also communities, sort of community groups. And this includes hobby groups, but very community-based organizations and individuals. And it was an experiment to see whether our belief that if people do come together and they're able to communicate in a way where they're able to find connection and dream and share their dreams. So there's a lot of resonance, as Monica said, we're very similar. If you're able to do that, can you collaborate? Can you actually come up with something that is bigger than you? And maybe even something that you never thought of before. And one of the areas that we touched upon was financial resilience, or financial models of it was one of those sort of fixed statements, right? So models of financing or something like that. And the person we asked to share her experiences about it said, "Can I change the title? Can I talk about so it was resource models of resourcing?" And her reflection was, because resilience isn't just about finances, it's about those human connections and those relationships. And one thing I learned a lot from this one day crazy experiment of 200 people coming together and actually finding that human connection and walking away with a sense of hope was that deep listening is something that I think within this noise and worry about, I mean, where Indonesia is now, I think the civil society movement is also a bit not sure what's going to happen in the coming years. But at the same time, there's this sense of this is the time to come together and collaborate and connect. And this is precisely why we need to do it. I think it was collective lifting up and a realization. A lot of what you said, Monica, one of the other speakers said, one of the things she learned in working with a small initiative, well, it's okay to be small, but you have to have a lot of friends, and then you can share that, and you don't have to have the same dream. You can have a variety of dreams, but you share them with each other, so you're able to find that connectivity. And that's what makes us resilient, because some part of our dream is probably being maybe not carried by ourselves, but somebody else is helping to make it come true. So So this sense of finding connectivity and ways to work together, not forced, before looking for the resources to support it was one thing. That's resilience. The ability to come together with a group and say this was an an indigenous concept. It's a very community-based concept where it's like when you have a potluck, you bring what you have for use of everyone. And if it's not going to be used, we keep it somewhere. So in the times that we need it, anyone who needs it can make use of it. It can be time, it can be resources, it can be space. And that's how you keep, and that was from a collective of artists. So I think one thing I learned very deeply from this experience of a month ago was that often we know it's out there, but we don't talk about it enough. And like what you said, Monica, we're siblings, but we don't talk to each other. But it doesn't happen organically. There has to be organizations, or what we're calling them now as ecosystem builders, or people who declare themselves or taking that role. This is what we're going to do. And then recognizing that you can have a million roles in an ecosystem and you don't have to travel together all the time. You can come together at moments where you feel most useful or needed, or sometimes you just come there to support what's happening. And I think this is something that maybe instinctively a lot of us have been doing, but this is a time when we need to do it more mindfully and consciously and with care, caring for ourselves, because without that, we can't care for other people. So seeing that there is light and be able to articulate what we do in a way that invites others outside of our little bubbles to create a new journey or be together or accompany each other on our own journeys, I think is something that needs to happen more. And the pressure now is on us because we did this one day thing and was very exciting. It's now, so what next? And that's something that I'm going to talk to Monica about more separately. But once you get all that excitement going, we also have the responsibility, not on our recognizing that it is an ecosystem, but it's not enough, no, to just have everybody feel good about it and then not do something afterwards. So we're already talking to some of other fellow ecosystem builders or others who also have a lot of ideas on and a lot of evidence of work being done in recognizing the resilience of communities, the resilience of organizations, and even individuals who are still doing the work despite all the shrinking of spaces because they're finding those spaces where they can still flourish and grow and create new hope. So yeah, I see that as resilience, very much so the ability to dream. And I think this is why Monica I in our first meeting immediately said to each other, we need to talk to each other because that it all this is nice and well and and good, but I also come across still a lot of civil society organizations that are still doing things the same way they used to do them in the 1980s, are still not dreaming. They maybe because they don't need to, because they're financially being supported all the time, but not innovating, not honoring the new ideas from the Gen Zs that are coming up, and so there's also a lot of I suppose unwillingness to accept different forms of activism. I'm seeing that a lot, where there are a lot of younger. They don't even call themselves activists because they're still trying to understand what it's all about. Because they're often said as they're not activists enough because they're not willing to do things that the older generations did, like stay up 24 hours to finish something or, work on something at the cost of their own health and self-care. So it's an interesting time to be in. It's also very challenging, but there's also a lot of hope. And I think that's also, as Monica said, hope is also a form of resilience.
Yeah. No, but see, it calls my attention that how many times you said the word time. It's time to act, it's time to dream. It's a time to dream together. And yeah, I agree with you. If we were having this conversation 5 or 10 years ago, uh, how do you think this would be different? Or how the work that you do today to help to strengthen the ecosystem has, what is this thing that you feel is different today? And also complementing on that, I liked a lot when you say to recognize the resilience that we have today, right? So in another conversation I had, someone told me, I said, the person said, I am resilient, and my organization is resilient. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here talking to you, right? So I like also this idea that is not that there is resilience in the field, but what is different today from your work of building resilience, or the way you see it? If you could go back 5 or 10 years ago, what do you think is different today? For any of you, Monica or Butsi, if any of you would like to.
I can share with you that at the beginning, like I like to talk about this understanding of resilience in a similar way as when we go to therapy and we start complaining about somebody else. And then the therapist will always say, well, you cannot change others, you have to change yourself. And I think that's the spirit with which we started working at Puentes. Yes, there are actors around the world, authoritarians that are doing things to close civic space, to, go back on, roll back our rights and endanger our freedoms, et cetera, et cetera. But truth is, we cannot change them. They're going to continue doing what they have been doing. What we can change is the way we respond to the new landscape that they're creating. And so I think the biggest difference I can see from when we started working at Puentes around 5 years ago is that we're now understanding better that it's less about complaining about them and it's more about focusing on what is it that we're supposed to be doing. And what is it that within this landscape we can and should do, again, collectively. I think this sense of connection, of understanding that this is not just a one organization's task, but that we really have to come together across disciplines and across borders and across different movements and causes. I see that gaining traction and a lot of understanding that this is what the moment is demanding of us.
Thank you. Butsi, did you add anything to that?
I think it's also what I would do would not. I think what I would do differently would just stop overthinking things, and have the courage to, let's just get a few people together to talk about this instead of planning a big conference and looking for funding. And because I think there was always this people waiting for when is it going to be, who's going to do it, and then not being happy with the way that some people were doing it. And what I've learned is that it's all about experimenting and learning. If it doesn't work out, why didn't it work out? And start doing that more, because I think once you do it, it's quite amazing the different connections that you find. So to borrow that, what's that? To be audacious and authentic and show up with what you have, and it's okay to show up with what you have. You don't have to. It doesn't have to be perfect. I've been amazed at when we finally had the courage to do this event in October. It of course it's more than an event. No, it's this. It turned out to be something that a lot of people were looking for, and since then people have been talking about wanting to work with us to strengthen the ability of communities to tell their story or individuals to tell their story. And this is very much in line with what we have been dreaming of, is having more voices out there telling their stories in order for the narratives to really change, for those voices to finally come to the front. So it's yeah, that's what I would have told myself. We were lucky enough to then have the opportunity to do that. But then one thing that I found very strange is that often resilience, I find, within the NGO community, it's about being secure financially. It's about having standard operational procedures and governance measures in the like all of those ducks in order, and you forget what you were dreaming of, because you get caught up in all of this. So as Monica, stopping, taking a breath, and then reminding ourselves of why we're doing this, and showing up in a different way other than just being compliant, I think is really important. That we have to be accountable to ourselves and to the cause, as much as we're accountable to whoever is supporting us.
Wow, I couldn't agree more, Budshi. Mónica, please.
Listening to Budshi, I was thinking that I think we have to change the way we think about our work. So we're not just those that denounce injustices, but actually we are the ones that have to inspire people to use their individual and their collective power to build the world that we think should be desirable and possible. And I think that the power of stories is definitely crucial, which is what narrative is about. Is what's the story that we tell ourselves about what can be done? What's the story that we tell ourselves about what's our purpose? How we connect with people, and how do we make sense of what's happening around the world in a way that creates agency? And therefore we can continue walking even in the middle of difficult circumstances, as opposed to just staying in the dark place of talking about injustices and pointing out to everything that's wrong with the world, that we have seen how that creates this apocalyptic fatigue that makes us feel powerless, and we have to emotionally shut down. And it's not just ourselves, but also the communities that we work with. So how keeping hope alive, as in telling stories of agency and of possibility, is part of the call that I think, I'm happy to say, we're getting to understand more now than 5 years ago.
Wow.
I want to add to that.
Please go ahead.
And I think it's really important, Monica, because sometimes I find that there are some people who then translate that as being ridiculously positive, and that's not it. No, it's like we recognize that there is darkness, and we're not saying it's not there, but there are so many stories of within that darkness there is much that can come out of it, or there are those beacons of hope that need to be amplified so they don't get swallowed by the darkness. No, like so it's that willingness to see that. And I will say that we were, one of the things that I learned is that how empowering that is, because when you do touch people in that way, those stories will come out to you unexpectedly. Like somebody will say how and I think the other thing that I wanted to say, that you can also find that within groups of people otherwise categorized as your adversaries, like government. No, like when you see them not as one monolithic thing, but as consisting of human beings, within which there are human beings who are wanting to do good things, but the system is failing them as well. But then you find those stories of them changing their colleagues and bringing about hope and justice in places where otherwise you wouldn't see that happen. And so that's just as darkness is contagious, so is hope. And since we're so good at problem defining, um, I think it's really nice to know that there's more defining hope, hope and stories of hope that are built, being brought up to the first surface more.
Wow, I was taking note here if we could build a bingo of some words, 10 words that have been appearing maybe here. Dream, hope, inspiration, energy, triangle of care, collectivity, connection, having friends, deep listening, agency and diversity in all of this, right? And when we were preparing, Milena and I, for this conversation with you, we said, okay, but the Weaving Resilience Initiative is also something that proposed to have this view and to work on resilience from the Global South and to the Global South. This sometimes assumes that there is a way of doing things and there is a way of seeing what resilience is that might be different from the way that if you are not in the Global South or if you're not from working with Global South organizations. So we went to the Oxford Dictionary, that is one of the most important dictionaries in the Global North, to look how do they define resilience. And we found that resilience, according to the Oxford Dictionary, is the quality or fact of being able to recover quickly and easily from or resist being affected by misfortune, shock, or disruption. How does this land to you when you listen to this definition? What would you keep or what would you change if you were to rewrite the Oxford Dictionary?
I think it's missing at the very least half of the story, and I'm being generous. I think it's not just about resisting the difficulties, but it's also about identifying the opportunities and being able to take advantage of them so we can thrive. Again, I think that's the most basic understanding of it. And I think, yeah, we can think of it as the possibility to resist and keep going and recover from something unfortunate, but also how do you take advantage of a new scenario that maybe opens up and gives you opportunities, and that's resilience too. But I also think I talked about earlier about two concepts that I think are super important and they're not reflected there at all, which is care and collectivity. So this is something I would never talk about resilience in an individual way. And I think that's definitely lacking in that definition.
Thank you. And you, Budshi?
I was thinking the same thing. The one thing that I noticed immediately that I didn't see in that definition was when I think of resilience, I think of community as well as circles. So when wow, and just from personal experience, I whenever there's someone who goes through a bad moment, a family death, somebody being sick, it's amazing how community comes together and it's in support of and and as someone in that position, you gain strength from that being together and sometimes just being held. It gives you power to be resilient as well, and so you're resilient together. So what you said earlier, Monica, about it, it's also about being there's a collective feeling behind it. And there is a lot of care. I just realized saying that, was just visually feeling that sense of resilience. And it's also, I don't know what it is. It's sometimes it's seen as, or it's looked down a condescending way. It's a mentality of just being grateful for whatever you have, because you're already poor. You live in the global south. And it's just this sense of resigning to what you have, when it's actually, I think it's a lot more powerful than that. It's recognizing your own ability to do so much more. And just a small anecdote, I remember going to the field to a very considered a poor part of Indonesia. And the donor, who wasn't from the Global North but worked with the Global North organization, went up to this amazing indigenous leader and said, do you consider yourself poor? And he couldn't understand. And then his son tried to translate and said, I can't translate it because we don't have the word poor in our language. So he described it. And then this 72-year-old man who had dressed up in indigenous, his outfit to welcome these donor organizations said, I'm not poor. This land is my land. We eat once a day, food that we have grown ourselves. My children have all graduated. So this whole thing of sense of there's a sense of pride, but not in a way that's obnoxious. No, like it's because it's gratitude as well. I think within resilience, there's also gratitude, but seeing that as strength, not as it's just, I can't think of the English word. It's just fate. No, it's there is that within that there's strength.
Wow, thank you, Budshi. Yeah, I think we throughout this conversation, it's been 45 minutes, you redefined resilience, right? Or you brought some different aspects that would make this concept meaningful to you and make it meaningful to you as you work with real life people, real life organizations, not for them only to perpetuate themselves, but to find the dream and the hope and why they are doing what they are doing. I heard during the interviews with some of the grantees, we heard some resistance also to the concept of resilience, not only as it is defined, but some people asking to change it for other words or to saying it. Budshi, I think it speaks to what you just said. Sometimes it's about, it can seem about resignation. I don't know if we say this in English, or not addressing the structural causes, or so. Is there anything more you would like to say about this? I see that you bring a lot of aspects to it, but somehow also resist a little bit to the concept. Where do you think this resistance can come from?
Before I forget what I want to say, I think it kind of goes like hand in hand with the word sustainability. Like I remember often when you're applying for funding or grant, there's a question on how will you exhibit sustainability, or how will you, there's this, and I found it very difficult to answer this a few years back, because we had been functioning as an organization for 20 years without a long-term funding grant. We had by choice decided to become a social enterprise, and were able to live off of that. And that, I suppose, that was our sustainability. But I think the other thing that I find sometimes sustainability and resilience, maybe as words or the way that they're defined, I always question where the growth aspect is. So it's not just maintaining the status quo, but it's about growing. So or stopping sometimes. I think there's a lot of resilience in stopping doing things, and so to give space for new things, or to take a break in order to transform. I think that maybe that isn't in the traditional sense of definition of resilience.
And you, Mónica?
The way I think about it is how it was discussed after the pandemic, after COVID, and how many people were saying rebuild better. It's not just rebuild, because going back to what it was before, like Budshi was saying, status quo is not desirable. So we want to use these opportunities in which we can rethink what is it that we want to do, so we can do it better and we can address the problems from the roots. So I definitely, I cannot think of just one single word that would replace it. I will probably talk about like collective care or something like that, but it's definitely something that recognizes that is not just going back to where we were before the crisis started, but actually, which is tied to the idea of finding opportunities to get the thing that you want to get advanced, which is a more structural approach to it. So that, yeah, I do agree that we need to rethink not just the concept, but maybe the way that we talk about it.
Thank you. So to end, I would like to know if you have anything else you would like to share, or to ask a question you don't need necessarily to answer. If resilience was an animal or a person, how would you describe it? Is there, or anything else you want to add before we close?
I wanted to share one idea that we use a lot, and is the idea of the jazz band. I've heard Budshi say
I saw your article.
very often that we have to show up with what we have. And I think the jazz band recognizes that each of us comes playing a different instrument, and we all have to shine under our best light. And jazz bands, as opposed to philharmonics, do not have directors, so there is fluid leadership. And we also have to learn how to riff off of each other to make the best music. And we have to learn how to read the energy of the room so we can make them dance to our beat. And I think that idea of keeping the jazz band going and moving and producing the best possible music is helpful to understand what are the types of dynamics that we want to embrace. Recognizing that there is difference, but that we all have like an ultimate goal that we share in mind, like the vision we share, but the tactics and the roles we can split and divide, so we can collectively activate supporters, engage flexibles, neutralize antagonists, and therefore be more effective in reaching our goals.
Thank you, Mónica. I think your challenge, right? After all this conversation, I should never have asked if it was a person. I learned with you that it's not a person, it's a multitude of persons, it's a collective, it's a jazz band. So thank you. This is much more interesting than the question I posed to you. Budshi, what about you?
I have a metaphor, and I was thinking resilience. So this has come back to me over the years. When I was, I think I was still, I guess in my 20s, we in Indonesia you have the big one of the, well, at least we consider it one of the seventh wonders, is the Borobudur temple, which is one of the largest Buddhist temples built in the eighth century, and it is a place where a lot of Buddhists come to go to the very top. There's like, I don't know, I think there's 8 different. You can go to the very top, and at the very top there are these stupas. They're called stupas, they're like triangle shapes that have little windows. And if you reach inside and you're able to touch the Buddha statue inside, then your dream will come true, or your wish will come true. Or if you're Buddhist, you will reach enlightenment. And so my family had gone there, and my father, there was a Japanese Buddhist monk who rushed up because he was so eager to touch the statue. And my father, being my father, we were wandering around, going up as you're supposed to go around, because there's actually the story of the Buddha all the way as you go around. And we got to a point, and he pointed up, and there was the edge of a stone that was cracked, and there was a plant growing from it. And he made the comment, so actually, the monk just rushed by us looking for the Buddha, and the Buddha is right there. So I think resilience is also about, again, caring for everything around us, this awareness of deep listening, but also deep seeing, because it's also about seeing what often people don't see, or the unseen, when there actually is a lot of resilience around us and we don't recognize it because it doesn't fit within the norms that, the definitions that we're used to. And I think, the whole point of ResiliPedia is also to get that wealth. Maybe it's not an English word that fits it best, but a word that we all have in our own languages, maybe. but also a way of how we explain it and see it. That is something that continues to grow. I think that whole point of it being growth and changing and fluid is also resilient.
Well, thank you so much. Talking about your own language, I was looking here how to say thank you in Indonesian. I say terima kasih, or can you tell me the
No,
pronunciation?
terima kasih.
Terima kasih. Muchísimas gracias, Mónica.
Muchísimas gracias
Muito
también.
obrigada. It's what an honor to listen to you. We learned a lot, and this is knowledge for us in this journey, is to listening and to learn from your lived experiences. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And we keep in touch. Yeah, thank you.